Yeah, we're live. I had to switch the photo around. Probably guys couldn't see that. It was flipped over for some reason. Every time I don't know what the deal is between sending or grabbing one of the photos that I have on my computer because I have lots of them and then uploading that for the live feed. When I do that, for some reason YouTube wants to flip the photo. So what I have to do is I have to take the photo, send it to myself, put it on my phone, edit the photo, flip it around a couple of times, and then resend it back to myself. And then all of a sudden it's okay. I don't know what the difference is. I don't know why it's upside down and now it's not upside down, but that's what we have to do. The question though for today is what's wrong with this photo besides the picture of me in there? That's the biggest thing I need to get out of there. But what's wrong with this turbo setup on this inline six cylinder? And obviously an inline six cylinder, they're cool. This is an old school one. This is the one that Freiberger gave me, and I'm hoping to get back to it and run some more testing with it. But so we want to talk about all the things that are wrong with this particular photo. And those include, first of all, let's look at the exhaust setup. So we have the stock exhaust manifold feeding what is probably less than a 2-inch outlet. And then we're stepping that up. We're using that stock exhaust manifold. Then we're stepping that up from whatever size it came out of that stock exhaust manifold all the way up to 3 inches. We've got a bend there. We have 3 other 90-degree bends going in and feeding the turbo. We obviously have a fairly sizable length of exhaust going to the turbo. And all of those are really the reason that I did that is because those are all stainless bends with V-bands on them that I have. And the final one being an elbow, a 90-degree elbow that I have that actually mounts the wastegate in line with the exhaust flow, because that's the way that it is on everything else that we mount this on. Normally that's on a twin turbo setup so that they go up and elbow out, and that gets what we call wastegate priority, which is good. That section of it is good. But the whole exhaust system, obviously less than ideal. And people would look at that and go, yeah, well, it's too big for what you're trying to do. It has too many bends. It's too long. It has all of these things. And then right now we have a low dollar CX Racing 76 millimeter turbo that I borrowed from my buddy Jason way back. In fact, this turbo might still be one of the ones that I ran the original Big Bang motor from way back when we did the 4.8 and the 5.3, way back in 2010, I think was the first one. So these are the turbos and they're still running. And we use that turbo going through an air to water intercore and then a length of tubing going over to this is an air hat, basically a bonnet that we mount on top of the carburetor. And it's designed to run with the CSU, Kevin's blow through carburetor that we run on so much stuff. But because that is a 4-barrel carburetor, we had on the stock intake manifold for this 292 inline Chevy, it comes with a 1-barrel carburetor attached to it. So we had to go from that size opening, which is, fairly small. We had to go from that size opening. I'm going to shrink this down a little bit here. So we'll move this over a little bit. So we had to shrink that down. Well, that was shrunk down. And then we had to step that up. We put an adapter plate on it from a 1-barrel opening, basically, to a 2-barrel opening. In this case, the 2-barrel that we used on it was a 4412 500 CFM Holley carburetor, the one that they use in a lot of the short track power things. It's an XP version of that carburetor that they ran for so many years. And we're blowing through that carburetor. We're also running E85 on it. So the other problem here is if we're looking at this, well, we've got a big carburetor going to an adapter down to a smaller hole running into the stock intake manifold. And there are a couple of problems with there. We're obviously going from big down to small, which is kind of the right direction, but we're blowing it into an opening that's, I don't know, an inch or inch and a half in diameter or whatever the opening is for that 1-barrel carburetor that is pretty small. The adapter is not ideal because the adapter isn't like a nice tapered angle to that opening. It's just a bored hole in the bottom section and then a big kind of open plenum that allows this adapter that they made allows for the flange for that 2-barrel. So you have both of those barrels opening up and hitting a wall down at the bottom, and then making their way into this one barrel opening down going into the manifold. Probably not ideal for distribution and droplet size and all the things that you want from a carburetor. It's probably not ideal. And then also distribution, not just from that, but distribution for the manifold itself, because you have that opening up into the opening. These are all Siamese ports, basically. So you have 6 cylinders, but only 3 openings in the manifold, each one of those feeding 2 of the ports. Siamese ports, it works. Obviously, they ran it like that for a long time. The OEMs were like that. I don't think that that's ideal. I don't think it's ideal for power production. They're not looking at a lot of power on these things. They were just kind of torque motors, but that's not ideal. And then obviously feeding the central part of that manifold and having it make its way evenly to all of those cylinders with that manifold design with the fuel, and then aggravating that potentially even more with a blow-through application. Again, probably less than ideal. Did most of the fuel and air go to the center tube where the opening is adjacent to the or the runner is adjacent to the opening that we have for the carburetor? Did the longer branch that circles around each side, did that get less fuel? Are those longer runners, so they want to make power differently than the small center one? There's a lot of things going on here. So not ideal. So this like quickie do-it-yourself kind of turbo setup obviously has a lot of things going against it. And I mentioned that we ran E85 in this. Well, there are a couple things going on with that carburetor, that 4412 carburetor, not an E85 carburetor, and also not a blow-through carburetor. So we've got a couple things that are happening there. And yet it still worked. All of the exhausts made it to the turbo. It made it out of the turbo. The turbo spun up. It forced air into the carburetor, and the carburetor provided fuel. And the way that it provided fuel, at least in E85 form, is that we just stuck 100 jets in it. So it's not ideal for drivability and stuff. But for the dyno, what we were doing, it worked fine for at least for wide open throttle once the thing was under boost. So just you just have to be a little bit tricky with the transition into boost and into light throttle. This turbo also not ideal for this combination, bigger than I would use for the kind of power level that we were doing. It was a little bit soft, which was okay for us, the way that we wanted to load this thing. I don't think we ran this thing more than, if I remember right, 4,500 RPM or something. It was not very much. So the thing is, on an application like that, that the formula for horsepower and torque, they cross at 5252. But if you never reach 5252, the torque is always going to be higher than the horsepower output, which is, kind of weird, I guess. At least for a lot of people, it is. Let's see here if we've got Clifford exhaust. Let's see how high we rev this thing with our different Offenhauser with our stock intake manifold. Yeah, revved all the way out to amazing 4,000 RPM, but made peak power at 3,600. All the RPM on the, let's see, I don't think we had dyno results. Yeah, I was looking for, I can't find the turbo results on that. Yeah, I'll have to look that up and see. But, not very much RPM. So these things were, it made 265 or 70 foot-pounds of torque down low, all the way down at 1,900. So the guys that are wanting this low-speed power, it was pretty torquey down there. And then this is with the stock manifold, made 158 horsepower, stellar. And then once we added boost to it, it was in the mid-200s, I believe. Yeah, so with other manifolds, we picked up 6 or 8 horsepower with the Offenhauser and the different 4-barrel manifolds and stuff. It was good. Somebody mentioned let's see. I'm going to go ahead and we didn't have was it dash 6 fuel line, the horsepower limit? No, not on this one. That carburetor will support 400 horsepower or more in NA form. So that's not a problem. The fuel flow is not a problem. Maybe ultimately on E85 we could see, but we'd never had a lack of fuel flow on this thing because, like I said, we weren't anywhere near what we've made for power even on NA applications. But the thing that I want to talk about on this thing is we've talked about all the things that are probably wrong with this, and yet it still works. So what I want people to do is realize that when you're putting these things together, it's more important to get it together and get it running, and it will work. If you just get all the exhaust to the turbo and then you have the right amount of fuel and timing going to it, it will work. Worrying about transitions and welds and bends and things like that, if you're going pro mod racing or no prep racing or something like that, and you're using every last ounce of horsepower that you have, but on something like this, something on a street car, those kinds of things, not really an issue. There are things that you would look at, at higher levels of power production that are just not really even a concern. And this is a really good example of that. It's just kind of thrown together with stuff that I had, and we had to make one or two welds on things to step us up to the 3-inch deal. And then I used all the 3-inch pieces that I had, kind of not wanting to cut stuff, especially the good stainless bends that I had. We didn't want to cut any of that. So just make stuff work so that I can get the turbo kind of where we want it, above the levels, above the oil pan, so that the oil will drain back. And then you just need to get a feed for the oil going into the turbo in it. And then it's the simple things. And all of that works. People tend to worry too much about, I need to get all the exhaust tubing length equal, because this was nowhere near that. This was just a stock exhaust manifold. And not a great stock exhaust manifold either. There are headers available for these. There are different things that you could use to make the turbo. People make dedicated turbo manifolds for these. I think cast ones, which are, again, good. You can run twin turbos if you wanted to, two smaller turbos. I would do that mainly just because it looks cool. And then you could have two carburetors or two throttle bodies or something like that, just because it looks good. Actually, I think the ideal thing would be to make I was thinking about trying to make a fuel injected manifold for this, but on the Siamese port, I'm not sure how well that would work. I've never tried that, but it would be interesting to try just because I never have, and it would be awesome. But this blow through carbureted thing actually worked fairly well. I was able to get the air fuel. All you need to do is get it in some sort of reasonable air fuel ratio, and it works good. It could be, I like it to be above 10-1, because then otherwise it gets kind of fat. If it gets in the 9s and doesn't work as well, doesn't make as much power, isn't as happy. But somewhere in the mid 10s is fine. Up to 12-1, for a short burst is fine. But anywhere in that range, fairly safe, as long as you take the timing away. One of the issues we had with this particular one is that it was a points distributor, and I think was lacking on some of the output that it needed to make this thing work. But I will run this thing again. I still have it in my storage, and we'll run it again and try to make some more power with it. It'll be cool. Let's see what you guys got going on. Let's see. I was going to have a poll here. I got something really cool coming up later on that I want to tell you guys about as soon as I get the photos for it. I'm hoping that when we do the poll on that one, there'll be 100% poll. I run the 292 Chevy 6-cylinder with boost again. Let's see what everybody's got going on now. What is that contraption? Exactly. And yet it works. 6 in a row. A turbo setup like this will never work for a hat. Yeah, it worked good. Just get that Richard guy out of the way. Thanks for getting me back to me on Facebook. Yeah, happy to help, man. If you got questions, that's why I do all this stuff. Not the best plumbing, but definitely capable of a big bang. Yeah, it would do that, I'm sure. Have you ever tested blower spacers? About 1 inch of piece of aluminum spacer that raises a supercharger like an OEM. They claim it runs 40 degrees cooler. I don't believe it. I don't know how a spacer would make the supercharger run cooler. I don't know how that would help. The only way, I mean, there are instances where something like that might help, like when we ran the M90 blower with the Tick Performance air to water intercooler, we weren't far enough away from the intercooler core. Basically, we were only using about this much of the core. So if you're only using about that much of the core, which is the opening size on the plate that we had, if you're only using that much of it, that's not enough of the core. So if you can use all of the core by spacing the blower up away from the core, and you can use all the core, I can see that happening. Just having more volume between those two, unless you're, if you were already utilizing all of the core, I don't really see how a spacer is going to accomplish that. Hood clearance or lane clearance. It's just a side hack turbo mount. It's good. Calvin, oh, what's wrong with it? It's not a 4200. It definitely doesn't make as much power as the 4200. It didn't even in turbocharged form make as much as an NA 4200 makes. Yeah, Calvin's a celebrity. Need the legendary 186 red motor from Holden. Yeah, I probably don't have a lot of those. I want a 261. Newcomer Racing just made over 1,000 horsepower with a 4-liter. I saw that. That was a pretty cool dedicated. That was a pretty hardcore build that they did. That was nice. And didn't they hurt the motor when they did that? Chris, what's going on? Victor Harbor, South Australia. Awesome. It's not a Honda. Did Honda make inline 6 cylinders? Did you do a video on a 305 stroker talking about a 334 or a 339? You can, and it will definitely make more power. It will definitely make more average power, definitely make more torque. The limitation on the 305 is the bore size. So there are a limited number of heads for that. But if I've run 305s with the trick flow heads, and those are good. And so if you had a head like that, especially in ported form, it would work good on a stroker version of that. .305 059 heads and an air gap. What cam and car would you recommend for 3,800 pounds and 410 gears? Planning on screwing studs and guides, not wanting to push the later 350 swap. Is an 059 head a Vortec 305 head? If it is, then they make an air gap. So you have that. So the cam choice then for that combination would be dictated by what you're trying to do. Do you want it to be a daily driver? Do you want it to have good average power production? Or do you care only about how the thing does at 6,500? Get me some information on that and we can pick a camshaft. I'm running new AN lines from the tank to the motor and return back. Supposedly the lump port mod helps. Yeah, I've seen that. Has anyone here picked up a brand new LS3 block? Yeah, I've bought a few of those. Just checking out what the stock bore is like. I think we had to have the stock one honed, if I remember right. What car that you have owned do you think you got the most miles per gallon and why? Probably, I like the little Sprint Turbo. I loved driving that. I had a Ford GT, which was also would bring a smile to your face. So either one of those. Although I got a really good deal on a F355 Ferrari that I don't own anymore, but picking my kids up from school in that was pretty fun. Is there anything that burns fuel that exists that you wouldn't add boost to? That's a good point, right? They all should get boost. The turbo isn't high enough on this, and yet we could put the turbo all the way up on the roof if we wanted. Honda did make an inline six, but it was in a motorcycle. Yeah, the CBX. That's right. I forgot about that. Just bought an Aeromotive dual 350 intake pumps. Their diagram, the setup is Y into a filter near the tank and back into two lines feeding each rail. Then rails on the front both hit a regulator. I don't know why you need to do that. We don't do that. The thing that bothers me about the two pumps and then into a Y is the Y is almost always the most restrictive part of that setup. Probably the pumps feeding the Y are way more restrictive than you need to worry about for having individual lines feed the rails. On the dyno, we normally run it deadheaded, and we run one line out of the regulator into one side of the rail and then loop it around to the other side. And we do 4-digit power level stuff with that. So I don't think that the splitting the lines and running two regulators and all that stuff is even necessary. Stock LS rails, we've run to 1,000 horsepower. Average power street strip through a 5 Vortec heads. Okay, so something like a comp 224, 230 cam, which is a 268 or a 270 cam. I'm assuming that that's a hydraulic roller block. That's a retrofit. So hydraulic roller would be a 276, an XR 276 HR. So 224, 230. Or you could go down to a 270, which would be a 218 to 224, would be a little bit more drivable. Yoda and Ponchos, what's up? I literally just is that Toyota and Ponchos? It's a good combination. I literally just pulled the 400 Pontiac out of my 69 Firebird. I dropped in a 250 inline six with a 5-speed Muncie. That's what's hanging on my cherry picker right now. A fresh 292 with Molnar rods. Oh, very cool. Did you put a the Sprint 6-cylinder in the Firebird? Just make a compound setup. Yep. Sean, so you want to know what the advantage of a 5-valve head is over a 4-valve? Pretty much guys have gone away from the 5-valve stuff. They were trying to get more flow. And it worked. I think the 355 was also a 5-valve. But it's complex. And I think that they've figured out that the 4-valve for power and longevity and all that stuff is the way to go. Yes, that's right. The rod ratios. What's wrong with the picture? Absolutely. So I'll be fine feeding my stock rail with a single dash 10, then put the regulator and flex fuel sensor on the return side. Is there a certain spot for the regulator? And anywhere is fine. We normally run it like on ours. We feed the regulator, and the return comes off of the regulator, and then we just have one outlet coming out of the regulator to deadhead it. If you're feeding the rail and then going back to the regulator, which we've also done, the regulator was fairly close to the rail. In fact, a lot of guys will mount the regulator on the rail, on the exit side of the rail. Are there still only 2 cams? There's 4 cams because they're twin. Yeah, they're twin overhead cams. Volkswagen still uses a 5-valve in their 2-liter. Yeah, see if they're still doing that. And a lot of times what the OEM does is not what they do for, race motors. I don't think Formula One does 5 valves in any of their things now. 69 was a 350 V8 auto. Originally nothing special, more fun with the Chevy 6. Guess people wound up. Yeah, that is good. Popping the hood and seeing that, and then having all the poncho guys just flip out is always good. Have you run the 3-valve jet head on a 2.6 Mitsubishi? I've run those motors on the chassis dyno, but never on the engine dyno. Yamaha did tons of 5-valve stuff. That's right. Yeah, Sean, it still is a twin cam on each bank. There are just more lobes on the cam. Yeah, particularly the Pontiac guys. If you tell them that 455 is a big block and 350 is a small block, they come unglued for that too. I heard the five valves don't have as efficient of combustion as the 4-valve. The person who said this pointed that the carbon buildup and head is evidence, but also cost to produce and maintain. It is more expensive to build that. How far can you bore an LS2 block? We don't go more than, I don't think on an LS2 block we even go 30 over on those. I think 5 or 10 is as far as we go on those. Somebody else might know. I don't think I've ever done more than that. Any plans to get back into racing? Yes, I'm definitely going to go to Bonneville. I'm going to start dehydrating my old Silverado. All right. Nicholas, there's no beginner questions, man. There's just questions. If I ran the return off of the regulator, can I cap off the return on the fuel rail? Yeah, what we do when we run, if we run the pump, the feed from the pump up to the regulator, and then we run a deadheaded fuel rail, you just cap the fuel rail. We feed one side of the rail, and then we have a crossover line in the front. So the fuel goes through one rail, crosses over to the other side, and then we cap that fuel rail on the end of it. And we're just feeding it from the regulator. What are your horsepower goals for what you're bringing to Bonneville? I'd like to make more than 200 at the tire, if that's possible with this 1 liter. I think it is with the turbo. LS2 stock sleeve is good for 5,000. Maybe that's what I was thinking. Maybe 10 was more than I thought, but yeah, it wasn't very much. I want to see a Bonneville video. Yeah, we'll definitely do videos on that. And hopefully I'll be testing stuff on the engine dyno with the 1 liter motor and also on the chassis dyno. I did a lot of, I got rid of all of my stuff, unfortunately, for the Sprint, because I did an endless amount of dyno testing, on the Sprint when I had the dyno jet. And I did a bit of it at West Tech too on the chassis dyno, but I've never run that motor on the engine dyno, and I want to. So now when I go down, I'm going to build an adapter plate to go from the Sprint bell housing to a Chevy or something. Because, everybody would run a Turbo 400 or Power Glide behind a 1 liter Chevy Sprint. How is our poll doing? 95%. Should I run the 292 Chevy 6-cylinder with boost again? So we got 5%. We got 1 or 2 guys that said no. Would a turbo or supercharger be better with fuel mileage and price still in mind? I think you would get better fuel mileage with a turbo, cruise fuel mileage with a turbo, because you're not running in boost and you're also not spinning the blower while you're driving. When they spin the blower, certainly all the OEM versions have a bypass valve, which eliminates some of the pumping loss, but you're still having to spin the blower. So with a turbo, I think on the same motor, I think the fuel mileage, the cruise fuel mileage, would be better with a turbo. I had a 250 inline 6 with a draw through turbo in a C10, ran a Ray J E-Flow. That's right. Quadrojet with water injection. Nice. 10 pounds with 8 to 1 compression stock cam. Should have run more compression. Yeah, what you should have done was just run something more than the stock cam, maybe. But more compression would also help. Like you could easily run that on 9 to 1. And if you went to 9 to 1 and put a cam in it, you definitely wouldn't have to worry about the changing compression, because your dynamic compression would be down if you chose the right cam. Plus, it would make a lot more power under boost. Add 300 horsepower of nitrous to the 292. It won't accept that. We know that. Do you know what Westech charges for a camshaft break-in and dyno test? I don't know what their day rate is. Is it a carbureted motor, or a carbureted motor is less than an EFI motor? I know that. About 16 feet of dash 10 feed, 16 feet of dash 8 return. I could have put the regulator near my pump and have the 2 feet long, have the return 2 feet long, essentially, instead of coming back all the way. Yeah, but that's okay. You can always use the extra line for something else. Make it look cool. Dylan, so VW stopped using the 5 valve after 2010. Okay. Yeah, a carbureted thing, if the motor's all ready, they should be able to get that done pretty quickly, especially if you're not changing stuff. Are you doing a camshaft break-in on a flat tappet cam? Oh, back in 1985, yeah. That's when all the Ray J stuff was all the rage. Do you have your drag van? Do you have your fingers crossed on the camshaft break-in? Do you have light springs on it or anything? Richard, you say to size the turbo for what horsepower you want. Makes sense. My question is, how much larger do you size it for, not at 100% all the time? Well, you're not going to be running it at 100% at wide open throttle at full boost all the time anyway. You're just going to be using that temporarily. The closer that you size your turbo to whatever power output you want, the more responsive it'll be. But we don't recommend you getting a 700 horsepower turbo and running it at 700 horsepower all the time. It's much better to do a 900 horsepower turbo. So we would need to know what the displacement of the motor is and what power output you want, and then we can kind of get you an idea on turbo. And Nicholas, it's probably better to run a non-deadhead system. We do that on the dyno because it's easy and we're not running it for very long. But it's better in terms of to not heat up the fuel by running a deadheaded system. But most guys want return setups, so you run the line up from the pump into the fuel rail and then loop it around like I told you about, and then mount the regulator on the backside somewhere, sometimes on the firewall, sometimes on the rail itself, and then run a return back from there. Like Coyote 800 wheel horsepower. Well, for a single, that's S475 territory, or there are lots of other turbos that will do that are more expensive than that. That are smaller than an S475. For twins, 800 wheel horsepower, I would pick two GT3582s. That's type of inexpensive turbo. Or maybe even a GT3076 might be near, you might get 1,000 flywheel horsepower, which is going to be maybe 900 wheel horsepower. So that would be fairly responsive. I don't think with a Coyote you're going to be limited in response rate. Single spring LS style spring rated for a small camshaft. Okay. Thanks for the help. Maybe I'll use my extra -8 for the catch can. Yeah, you could do that. That would look cool. Yeah, drag band. That's the having less spring rate makes you feel better as long as you have lots of zinc in the oil that you're using, like break-in oil. And then I always lube the cam really well and the bottom of the lifter. And then I put additive in there too. And for break-in oil, you can never have too much zinc. Just makes me feel warm and fuzzy on the break-in, because the whole time during the break-in, you're kind of holding your breath. So we're at 94% saying yes. We need boost all the time, all the boost all the time. Boost, boost, boost. Nothing but boost. The inline 6 stuff is cool. I want to run the RB motor. I want to run the. I think that the slant 6 is ready to put back together too. And I think that doesn't Comp Cams have a slant 6 camshaft? Ford. Chrysler, Hemi, Viper. Nice. I like that. Those are all Chrysler V8s, Hemi, Chrysler, LA stuff. Chrysler 170 to 225, 60 to 87. They have a 215 and a 220 cam. That would be fine, right? And those are high energy ones too. Oh, they have 2.6 and 212 stuff. Okay, so they have little cams too. That's cool. This is the closest to 100% that I've seen. Thanks for all the tech and knowledge. I hope you don't plan on retirement anytime soon. I'm a little too young for that. I always put zinc additive in my oil, and yes, high zinc break-in oil. Yeah, that's good stuff. 69 votes and 29 likes. Come on, guys. Well, actually, there's 59 now and 46. So we got a pretty decent ratio there. When I do the slant, can you try tuning the carb on the Aussie speed manifold? I do have an Aussie speed manifold. And so we want to run that. What cam is the best turbo cam? The one you got. That's right. Yeah, the Aussie speed manifold will allow us to run a. Do you know what, Julius? Is that? I didn't even look at it, but does that have a Carter carburetor flange, or is it a Holley flange or a Quadrajet flange? Scotty, I don't like the steel shim gaskets unless we're running or putting a motor together for like a class, like some of the roundy round stuff. Otherwise, I don't normally use the steel shim gaskets. Julius, you sent that manifold? Dude, that is awesome. It is for a 4150? Okay. So let me know when I'm done with that. I will definitely send it back to you. It's been sitting a long time. So I put that slant 6 back together. The head's sitting there. The head's been wrapped up. It's the guys from L&R redid it. And we even put I think we put the 340 springs on it so we could run more camshaft. And I think that all of these cams are like, I think these slant 6 cams were all like 440 lift or something. Yeah, 435, 440, 425, 440. Yep. So all that should be fine. Richard, did you go to school to learn mechanics? No, I didn't. I have a degree in advertising. Speaking of manifolds, what is the best LS7 manifold that will fit under the hood? It depends on what RPM range you want. I like the MSD manifold. But some of the short runner stuff that Brian sells, and probably Texas Speed and other guys have them too. Some of those will make more power, but they just, it's always a trade-off. Richard was born with the knowledge. I was just blessed with it. No, I made lots of mistakes as I was learning. How many and what size wastegates do you need for what? For if you have twin turbos, you should run 2 wastegates, and I like 45 millimeter turbo smart gates. Julius, man, much appreciated. That's awesome. I'm stopping at 7,300. Yeah, I'd use an MSD then. The MSD manifold's good. I sure would like to test a ported version and have it do something. I want that to be like beneficial. I've been talking to the Hudson boys some more today, which was awesome. It's always good to get on the phone with those guys. They they have some very, very cool stuff, which we'll be talking about in some of the live feeds coming up. If you study zinc additive, you'll find it's not possible to blend it into the oil. It can only be done at the refinery. It's not that simple. Okay. Still makes me feel better to run high zinc oil and zinc additive. With a 103 millimeter throttle body, you think would not be a pain with a stock ECU for that MSD? No, I mean the factory throttle body is already 92 millimeters, right? So that's not that big of a jump up on the LS7. 103 is a big jump up from a 78 millimeter throttle body, but the factory stuff is not a problem. You have 102. Yeah, that's fine. 102, 103 is the same throttle body. Julius, that's awesome, man. That goes way back. That actually, honestly, the mods for mods, which I thought was the best title ever of any of any series of magazine stories I did. That was one of my favorite things. I had a lot to because that Ford modular book was also one of my favorites. I love doing the first 5-liter Ford book that I did was very cool because it was my first one, so it was neat and there was lots of information in there. I would do it completely different now, obviously, but it's a learning thing. But the modular Ford stuff, I did a lot of modular Ford testing. I mean, for a while there at West Tech, that's the only motor that I ran. I ran the 2-valve stuff, and then was lucky enough to get some 4-valve stuff. And the guys from Ford sent me a crate motor, which was a Terminator motor, which is awesome of them. But I did right by them, and I did more stories with that crate motor than probably like if they ever gave any crate motors to any other editors or whatever. I did more stories with that motor, and it was in a book and videos. And so I did more with that motor than all of the other guys combined. So I try to make sure that I take care of those guys when because it's very rare that ever happens for me. And that was very, very cool. So I got to do lots of 4-valve stuff, got to do NA stuff, got to do, we never did real high horsepower stuff. We did 1,000 horsepower stuff. I never did like Mahovitz level of stuff. He was running his motors there when I was doing a lot of that modular stuff. But that series was definitely one of my favorite series. The other thing to remember is the additive package is only active when the oil is hot, so always heat the oil to at least 180 degrees before doing a cam break-in. That's probably good advice. I have to look and see when they do break-ins what temperature is. I want to run the engine on the dyno and see what it does, and then dyno it at the wheels to see what drops off before I run all the nitrous. That would be good. That'd be good information. You'll find out what the loss is on your specific drivetrain, including the tire size and rear axle and all that. And also, what you'll find out is the difference between how you run it on the dyno, like with accessory configurations and exhaust and all that, compared to how you run it in the truck. Because a lot of guys don't realize that that's also a big change. I mean, if we run it on the engine dyno with an electric water pump and long tube headers and just collector extensions, nobody ever runs it like that in a car. So you have to take into account those changes, and then that have nothing to do with the drivetrain losses. And then are you also able to run it with the same tune, the same amount of timing, and the same air fuel in the vehicle that you ran it with on the engine dyno. So it's more than just a powertrain test when you're doing that. You need to take all that stuff into consideration. Chevy Love, 450 horsepower, 383. Goal is 750 horsepower. What is the best centrifugal supercharger? There's not a best one. There's lots of good ones. For 750 horsepower, I would pick either a Vortec or a ProCharger probably. And for those, like a ProCharger would be a D1SC, or a Vortec would be maybe pick a T trim for that. Want to try to get the cam kit for a 3.9 Magnum this summer for my Dakota. Definitely JBA shorties, because that's all you can get for headers. Yeah, I'm surprised. I keep getting comments on header stuff about guys for some reason still thinking that stock exhaust manifolds or shorty headers are better for low speed torque, and that's not the case. That's not the case at all. Long tube headers are better everywhere than the shorty stuff is. I still want to do nitrous, but RPM told me not to do this with a new transmission. How would the MSD manifold compare to the Trailblazer SS on a? Well, a Trailblazer SS is not a manifold that you can run on an LS7, because a Trailblazer SS is a cathedral port manifold, and an LS7 is an LS7 specific rec port. It takes a completely different intake manifold. They're different engine families. Dave, I remember going to the Ford plant in the 50s and watching the cars come off the line, and they would start them up and rev them right away. Wow. Did they, Dave, do you know if they pre-ran those motors before they put them in? Were they, a lot of times the OEM stuff is run with natural gas or something. They run the motors on the dyno just to make sure they're not leaking and stuff, and then put them in. So I don't know if they still do that, if that was a thing. And also, we need to talk about your turbo thing. I'm torn between a 5.3 and a 6.2. My question is, which 6.2 is the best one for 600 reliable wheel horsepower? Do you have all the 6.2s that are ever made to choose from? An L92 is a good start, and you can certainly make 700 wheel horsepower, but not NA if that's what you're thinking. It's definitely going to be boosted. The current engine's camshaft is still good at over 25,000 miles and around 1,000 eighth mile passes on a 250 shot nitrous. I was thinking about keeping it, but you talked me into a bigger cam on the 408. What size is the cam? Small on the 408 right now? Regarding headers, I think people are stuck on flow versus scavenging. Yeah, shorty headers are just the reason that the OEMs pick those is because they have cast manifolds that help retain all the heat and light the cat off right away. And it's also better for fitment than long tube headers are. And they don't tend to get the heat near other stuff. So again, it's kind of a fitment issue. But long tube headers add power down low. They're really good at that if you size them correctly. Have you experimented with using nitrous to spool turbos? Yeah, we've seen that done before, and it's definitely beneficial. Yeah, Julius, I did lots and lots of stories for Jim at Muscle Mustangs and Fast Forwards. We laugh about that every time we get together, which isn't often enough. I like Jim and Evan very much. And when I was writing for them, he used to call me, because Muscle Mustangs and Fast Forwards got to be, it was huge. And he would call me, yeah, they added another 16 pages. I need some more text stories. I'm like, okay, I'll get going and try to get some more stuff in. There was good times. I used to write a bunch of stories for those. They didn't run them, Dave, in the 50s. Okay. Dylan, yeah, if you could get long tubes for the V6, I'm surprised that nobody makes those. Drag van, should I bring my own headers? You can, if you want to run it the way that it is in the car. They will have Dodge headers, but when you call them and talk to them, ask them about that, because I don't know which headers they have there for the Dodge V8. The truck manifold from a 6.2 that's similar to the Trailblazer SS, but with rec ports. So an LY6 manifold, the MSD manifold will be better than the LY6 manifold. But an LY6 manifold is for a that's also not going to fit on an LS7. That's for an LS3. So there was no truck version of an LS7 manifold ever made. All you have is the factory LS7 manifold or the aftermarket ones. The truck manifold is only LS3, which is a different, and they're not interchangeable. John Causey talked about his big motors. If there's any rust in the header, starting and idling will pull rust backward into the motor. So start it and immediately rev it. Okay. The current engine is a 360 with an Urson torque 40. The new engine I'm building is a 408 with a torque 50. Okay. 60 watching and 60 likes. We got 62 and 62. That's 100% on our watch to our viewer to like ratio. That's the first time I've seen that, I think. 5.7 Tundra long tubes were they made? I don't know. You have to do a search for that. I would think that somebody would make that. I could bring the complete exhaust. I don't know if the X pipe and stuff will fit on the dyno. You'd have to ask them about that. And depending on which dyno they run it on, if they run it on the 902, usually X pipes won't fit because there's a big section of dyno, behind the motor. And so unless there's an extension off of the header to then add the exhaust to, sometimes that stuff doesn't fit, but you can ask them about that. LS4 with an adapter to an LS7 is the answer. You want to run the LS4 intake manifold? How do you feel about drilling 95 LT1 heads for small block Chevy intake manifold? You also have to change the water passages on the LT1 heads. I don't think that I would go to that trouble. I would just pick a different head. You should just put Vortec heads on it. Have you ever done anything with a Vortec or with a 5-liter LS or a 5-liter Lexus V8? I have not. A lot of guys have asked me to do the 1UZ and the 2UZ V8s for the Lexuses, and I see a lot of those in the wrecking yards, and that would be cool, but I'd never run one. Yeah, drag van. I've run full exhaust on those before, but we had to, and the guys from Westech have with Engine Masters, they've done exhaust tests, but it has sometimes some of the stuff has to be made just to get back behind it's where the absorber and the water tower and everything is. Not the water tower, but it is a water container, let's say. Do you have any plans to test the new performance design LS7 TRC intake manifold? Yeah, we've talked to them. I met them at MPMC and we've talked about that. At night when I was on the nitrous, you could see the blue flames out the pipes because they come out in front of the wheels. That is cool. I remember seeing that on the, I like that they included that in the Cars movie, that they had the little fire cone behind the cars. And that is cool. And you can definitely see that on nitrous stuff, which is why I want to run and I'm hoping that we see that when I run zoomies on this application that I have coming up. Will Vortex style heads be easy to fit to a 95 LT1? I thought you were talking about putting LT1 heads. I would use LT1 heads on an LT1, but I thought that you were talking about putting LT1's heads on a conventional small block. So maybe I got confused there. Otherwise, if you have LT1 heads on an LT1 block, then you definitely can change the intake manifold. But there are carbureted intake manifolds for an LT1 unless you want to run fuel injected. How much of a difference do X pipes make over crossover? The guys from Engine Masters did that test recently, and the X pipes are not worth a lot of power. None of the changes in the exhaust system made a big change in power. X pipes or H pipes or any of those things, none of those made a big difference, but they did change the way the thing sounds. I'm a big fan of Yamaha, of their bikes anyway. I'd like to see other vehicle motors hold up. The guys that I was talking to from the Hudson Boys that do all the Metro, that have all the Metro records, they also recently did a 2-liter SHO Taurus motor, which is very, very cool. The Cadillac Escalade intake is a Recport version of the Blazer intake. Yeah, and so is the LY6, but those are Recport LS3 versions of that manifold, but not LS7 versions. 1UZ is one of my favorite engines. Can't seem to get my hands on an LS or SC400. I've seen a few of those in wrecking yards. All right, Julius, thanks, man. And there is a Bill, you're right. There is an upgrade to put LS coil packs and stuff on an LT motor. I just don't know how much it costs though. Love the sound of X pipes in my van. Yeah, an X pipe in the car sounds really good. Want to swap to a distributor. There is a carbureted manifold for the LT stuff, and then you could run a conventional distributor like we did. You can run a carburetor in a distributor if you want to run a carburetor. In fact, I have to get that back to Bob. So, Bob, if you're out there, please chime in and let me know. I can get your stuff back to you. No sense of it sitting in my storage. About $3,000 for the coil over conversion on an LT1. That's a lot. That's why people don't do that. Gene, what's going on? The guy I bought my 1500 from has a broke down B-body Caprice with a 4.3 liter. Couldn't talk him into selling it over the C1500. Yeah, the little 4.3 liter V8. A lot of people don't even know that exists. Not talking about the swap. I just put a 36-1 crank trigger micro squirt and LS coils for the 500 on the weekend. It ran great. I'd be interested in seeing an old Mustang SVO 4-cylinder, get a modern turbo and down run. I'd like to see that too, and that might happen. We're trying to work on that. Yeah, Scott, the LS7 is distinct. It is the high end version of the LS. That's why I don't ever play with them, because they're big money. I've run a few of them. We ran a big LS7 head test, and I built a 427 that was LS7 and also LS3 base, because the heads are interchangeable. You just have to run the right intake manifold with the right cylinder head, and there are no factory truck manifolds available for the LS7. Is a 4.3 liter V8 on the Gen 1 or Gen 2? It's a Gen 2. It's an LT1 Gen 2 based small block. It is a very small version of an LT1. If we're able to crowdsource the cost, is there any big money engines you'd want to run? A Godzilla would be cool, maybe, or a Big Bang Coyote would be cool. Also know there was a transverse front wheel drive 4.3 liter V8. What did they run that in? Look up 24X LT1 conversion can be done for $1,200 if you do your own wiring. Okay. It was an 80s Cadillac. I know that they had a 4-liter V8, I thought. Freya, is that on the 24X LT1 conversion? Are you using an LS, like a truck ECU or something? What ECU are you using? So 92% saying yes. So we're going to end it there. That's obviously a big yes. We got one more minute. When would be ideal to look up a swap from running a distributor to running a cam sync for coil on plug ignition on small block Chevy? I don't know why anybody would do that. I don't understand the desire to run a coil and plug for a distributor small block Chevy when it's already simple and it already works. Just chiming in quick, Godzilla crate engines are selling for 20 grand in Australia. I know. The guys from Motor Trend have one that they were going to do testing with that they bought, and I think it was a Ford one, and I think it was like $7,500. And when I found out about it, Freiberger said, "Hey, that we're not going to do testing on this motor, so if you want to buy it," and I was thinking it was like a $1,500 takeout from a wrecking yard or something. I'm like, yeah, I might be a player for them. They told me how much it was, and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm going to pass on that. Just put in 8 hours of die making. I get the race car ready for the start of the new season. Good luck, Gene. When did Porsche start using a 58X flywheel? Did they actually do that? Volvo inline fives are cool. I agree. I'd like to have a Volvo wagon. That would be awesome. Yeah, that's the stock Ford one. Can't get it through Ford. Have to use a blueprint. Okay. Got a Godzilla and an F550. Wow. Has a lifter tick with 2,500 miles. I use the 411 PCM. Okay. I think it started in 95. Where is that? Is that on the back of the flywheel? Where are those on the Porsche, Dan? Are they in the middle? My girlfriend has a Volvo wagon with a 3.2 inline six. Yeah. I want a turbo 5-cylinder Volvo wagon, though, like a T5R or something. Is that what they were called? All right, Taylor, we'll see you later, man. Swap all my small block Chevy to LS coils for more precise and consistent spark control. 36-1 crank trigger and a bolt in the distributor for the rotor. Cool. Having major piston slap on my Escalade. Are there long-term concerns with that? Is it only during the cold startup? My truck does that too. I just keep driving it. V70R. Back of the flywheel, closer to the engine. Okay, by the ring gear. Okay. Would you drill the LT1 heads for a small block? Like I said, there's already carbureted manifolds for the LT1 head, so you can just do that unless you want something specific for small block. Like maybe do that for the Holley Stealth Ram on there. That would kind of be cool on there. Escalades came with piston slap from the factory. Only at cart. And I always let it warm up a bit before driving it. It goes away. My truck does that too. I just keep driving it. I don't worry about it. Quieter if you don't use synthetic oil. And just use something a little bit thicker. I like the oil pressure in my truck. I think part of the oil pressure problem in my truck actually is the sending unit. I think I need to replace that. I think it's leaking actually. Best 3 mods for Durango. Cam and springs would be the first thing. And then long tube headers. LS430 Lexus was a nice running V8. Yeah. Do you know what comes in them stock? A 20. I don't know about a 2022. I don't. If that's a 5, but if that's a 5.7 Hemi, right? So we've run 5.7 Hemis that come with VVT and they come with a dual runner intake manifold, which are really good. If that 2022 is the same as like the later one that we ran, it's not that late. It's not a 2022, but there are VVT cams for those. The intake manifold, I don't think that I would change. Working on another 454 Vortec to the valve rotators. We normally replace those because when we put springs in them, we don't use the rotators anymore. We use the rotator eliminators. Best Hemi content out there. I actually, I feel like I've been lacking a little bit in Hemi content. And on that note, it is time to go. Hopefully, I will see you guys all later tonight, working on more videos as always, and have some cool stuff, as I said, coming up. I'm just waiting for some photos. All that's going to be cool stuff. I will see you guys all later.